Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 62 of the Feeling Good podcast. Today we have another Ask David episode. We've had an accumulation of questions, and so we need to get to those. Before we do so, I wanted to tell our listeners that since we've been tracking our numbers, it's been quite interesting to see how people are listening to us and where from. Back in October when we first started tracking, we had 22,000 downloads. And so far in November, we have 14,000. So we're doing pretty good. Sounds like people are happy to listen to our podcast, David.
Yes, and if you like them, tell your friends, spread the word, use all these social media tricks to see if you can help us expand our audience. We really appreciate all of you who are listening to our podcasts.
Yeah, one of the ways you can support us is by leaving your own comment or question on the podcast show notes. Another way is to leave a review on iTunes. And David just wrote a little posting on the podcast show notes that shows how to do an iTunes review. In fact, we're going to update this for people who do this on an iPhone or iPad. And of course, just tell your friends and colleagues. And that would be your way of showing that you appreciate the podcast.
So far on our reviews, how many do we have? What percentage are 5-star reviews?
I think that iTunes shows the rating in stars, and we're at 5 stars total.
So we've had all 5-star reviews, and so that's what we're hoping for. And if you have a problem, sometimes I make controversial comments.
Yeah.
And so write to me, email me directly if there's something I say that upsets you or you don't like or whatever, and we can actually turn it into an ask David, or I can sometimes get back to you directly.
Yeah, there's a smattering of 4 stars, and I saw, according to iTunes, there's a 1 star and a 1 2-star.
We have some bad ones.
Apparently, yes, but those people didn't leave a written review, so we don't really know what they didn't like about it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Maybe they were looking for something different.
Yeah. We had one, I saw, our first feedback. We just started publishing them on YouTube, among other platforms, and we got one. I think I sent it to you, didn't I? Just atrocious review, but it sounded very confused or maybe even psychotic or something. It was. I don't mean to be critical of the person, but it was very bizarre.
Well, I don't know. But it
was about ghosts and
really,
yeah.
Yes, because now with the new system, the podcasts get posted directly on YouTube as well. So that's another way for people to find you. If of course there's no video, it's just the sound. But that's an interesting other way to have your podcast be discovered. So. Before we move on to the questions, I want to give a shout out to our one listener in Ethiopia. I don't know how we say hello in Ethiopian, but if that person tells their friend, maybe we'll have double the number of listeners in Ethiopia.
Yeah, and we could get as many as 4, maybe.
Oh, yeah, quadruple.
Well, we're flattered by all the listeners that we have. And also, we're going to do several short podcasts, Ask David's, because you've been sending in terrific questions. We asked for questions recently, and you have responded, and the questions will lend themselves to a little bit of interesting dialogue, I think.
Great. So without further ado, here's a question from Robert, who says, I was wondering whether the 3 steps of effective communication 1. Empathize, 2. Disarming the critic, and 3. Feedback and negotiation would work when applying it with others who already know this technique?
Well, that's a great question. There's actually 5 secrets of effective communication, and we're going to be doing a series on them.
Yeah,
shortly.
we're about to do that. Yeah,
we're going to do one per week. But the 5 secrets of effective communication, and they're in no particular order, are the disarming technique. That's number 1. Thought and feeling empathy is number 2. Inquiry is number 3. I feel statements is number 4, and stroking is number 5. And it doesn't make any difference if you know about them in terms of if someone else is also using them. One thing that people in our Tuesday group have been saying lately is what a pleasure it is to have a group of colleagues who all use the same concepts in communication. It really works better if you know these techniques. The effectiveness of these techniques will depend on your skill in doing them and whether you're speaking from the heart. If you're using them as techniques to manipulate someone, they won't be effective whether or not that person is familiar with the 5 secrets of effective communication. But essentially, the 5 secrets of effective communication are what the world's greatest communicators do when they're at their very, very best.
So I understand that they're not to be used as manipulation or as manipulative techniques. So what should they be used as? What would be the purpose for somebody to use those techniques?
The reason I developed them and learned them in the first place was because when I began practicing cognitive therapy, I think I was then and still am a very effective and creative technician. Even to this day, I create new therapy techniques almost every time I work with someone. But I felt that my interpersonal skills were below par. Like I had great technical skills, but I wasn't always developing that warm bond, especially with patients who were from time to time critical or oppositional or skeptical. And I still do actually. One of the best teaching methods is to have a co-therapist. And early in my career, there was a fellow from London, Sterling Morey, who came as a medical student.
You've talked about him.
Yeah, and he sat in with me, and he had very little skill in psychotherapy, but he was a very gentle and warm and empathic person. And I recognized right away that his interpersonal skills were far better than my own. And I said, I want that for myself. I want to add that to what I bring to the therapeutic process. And I really worked at developing and mastering the 5 secrets, and it really changed my life. So for the listeners, if you're a therapist, learning the 5 secrets can make you a vastly more effective therapist. And for all of us, learning the 5 secrets can help you develop warmer and more loving and more satisfying and more rewarding relationships with other people. But there is a price to pay, which involves the death of the ego giving up the need to be right, the need to blame, the need to constantly argue and defend yourself. And we'll get into that soon in our series on the 5 secrets. And we're going to do 1 secret each week for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And give you assignments to practice during the week, so you can really learn the 5 secrets one at a time, and then after that you can begin to integrate them in a natural way when you interact with other people. Yeah, I
hope we can really go into depth into those, because they're really important. We covered them in a couple episodes early on, but
we didn't go into enough depth on it. People got all interested and excited, but you really have to practice them, and you really want to have a tremendous determination. It has to come from the heart to learn how to do those. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And so we have next actually 2 comments from Avi. I don't know how you pronounce this. Avi, probably. I'm going to do them in 2 separate sections because they're on slightly different topics. So Avi says, I would also like to express my deep appreciation for your sharing your wisdom and experience with all of us. In fact, I connected to the materials so much, I found it only about 2 weeks ago and already caught up and heard all 60 podcasts. Well, that's dedication.
Yeah, thank you, Avi. I love hearing that.
Considering the breakthrough idea that we need to overcome a person's hidden resistance before we can proceed to try to help them, isn't there a type of catch-22 in the case of a depressed person? Since their primary weakness is that they've lost hope, if we position ourselves as the voice against change, they won't find within themselves the strength and perseverance to overcome our challenge, since that's the very fiber of their current weakness. In other words, I'm challenging them in their weakest and most vulnerable place. I love the language this person is using, and this is a great question, really.
Well, yes, this is perhaps, to my way of thinking, one of the biggest issues in all of psychotherapy, the whole issue of hopelessness and how to motivate the client. When the loss of motivation is central to the depression that they're struggling with.
And when you're using paradoxical agenda setting, you're telling them, well, maybe you're right. So
yeah, exactly.
How do we get out of that?
Exactly. Well, part of it is the outcome resistance and part is the process resistance. In the next question, we'll deal with outcome resistance.
Yeah.
But I'm going to deal in this one with process resistance. And process resistance means that the patient might want to get better, but doesn't want to do what he or she has to do to get better. And my research has documented a powerful impact of doing psychotherapy homework on recovery from depression. And so at my clinic in Philadelphia, I published a number of articles in top psychology journals that the essence of it showed that of the patients who did at least some psychotherapy homework throughout the treatment, the prognosis for improvement or full recovery was overwhelming. And of the patients who refused to do self-help assignments, very few, if any of them, improved or recovered. A lot of them just deteriorated and dropped out of therapy. So it's probably the most important causal factor in all of psychology and psychiatry. It's the biggest causal factor on recovery from depression is getting patients to do something to help themselves between sessions. And early on, I tried all kinds of techniques to get my patients to do the psychotherapy homework. Aaron Beck had developed techniques that he suggested. Albert Ellis had suggested techniques that he had developed, but none of these techniques were effective. I tried literally 50 ways to get patients to do their psychotherapy homework. Of course, some did, half the patients did. Yeah. But the patients who didn't really they didn't seem to want them. Just to give you an example of a humorous technique that Albert Ellis in New York created, and I even tried this, he said, have your patients give you like $50 in cash and put it in an envelope with a little note, addressed to the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh yeah, it's a rather well-known technique now for procrastination.
Exactly, and tell your patients that if they do their homework.
We apologize to members of the KKK.
Yeah, if we have any white supremacists listening, we didn't mean to insult you. Actually, we did, but the thing is that if you do your homework, I'll give you back the $50 next week. And it's going to be in an envelope, all addressed to the Grand Wizard, all stamped and ready to go. And if you don't do your homework, then we'll drop it in the mail and send this, your contribution and note to keep up the good work
with your address and phone number.
Yeah, exactly. But even that didn't work.
Yeah.
And so Then in the early 1980s, I stumbled across the only technique that was effective, and that was part of what led to team therapy and paradoxical agenda setting. And what I did was to send, I wrote and sent, and I still do, send to every new patient before the first therapy session. When they call on the telephone, I'm going to send you a package of materials, and there's some things to fill out and bring to the first session. And one is called the concept of self-help memo.
Yeah,
and the memo,
which I use in my practice.
Oh, do you? That's I love hearing that. Yeah. And by the way, on my trip to the East, I'm kind of changing the subject, but I just happened to run in my lecture at Stanford recently to two of Fabrice's current and former patients who were raving about you, Fabrice, and what a wonderful therapist you were, and it just warmed my heart. I wasn't surprised to hear it, but it was a real joy to hear it talking about how you had helped to change their lives, and what a great thing. But at any rate, the memo, the concept of self-help memo, said that there are several ways to get over depression and anxiety or other problems that you come to therapy with. One is just to talk and have the therapist listen and support you, and that's very important. We certainly provide that if you decide to work with us here at this clinic. Number two, some people might need a medication. Fortunately, most depressed and anxious patients can now be treated without pills. But if you need a medication, we'll certainly provide that. And then the third thing is that many therapists now emphasize learning the tools to change your life, the tools to get over your depression, the tools to improve your marriage or your relationship. And at this clinic, we emphasize this as an absolutely necessary ingredient in the therapy. And then the memo describes 10 of the most common homework assignments they'll be asked to do between sessions, like taking a mood test to see how you're doing, using the daily mood log to record your negative thoughts and identify the distortions in them, using the relationship journal to write down exchanges that happened between you and someone you're not getting along with. What did they say? What did you say next? Yeah. That type of thing. And then, so this is all very written in an appealing, short way. And then there's a little contract that they have to tick off and answer each item. And the first one is, I understand that if I decide to work at this clinic, that the therapist requires consistent self-help assignments between sessions. Yes, no, or needs discussion. The second item says, if I am accepted in this clinic, I agree to do consistent self-help assignments between sessions throughout the therapy. Yes, no, or needs discussion. And then the number of minutes I agree to spend is per day is 10 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. The number of days per week I'll do this is like 5 days a week or whatever, and the number of weeks I agree to continue with this is, how many weeks would you agree to be doing these self-help assignments? Yeah. And then the memo goes in a paradoxical direction and lists 25 good, and the word good is in large letters, italicized, bold, 25 good reasons not, and the word not is italicized, bold, not to do the self-help assignments. Yeah. And then the memo lists 25 of the best excuses patients had given me over the years why they shouldn't have to do it, or they can't do it, or they're too overwhelmed, they don't have time, they're too hopeless, nothing could work, or I have a chemical imbalance in my brain, only a pill could fix me, this type of thing. And they have to tick off how many of these 25 reasons describe them. Yeah. And then at the end they're asked, now having read this, would you prefer a kind of therapy where you'll be required to do psychotherapy homework, or a kind of therapy where you just come and talk to the therapist and don't have to do homework? And then I negotiated that at the beginning of therapy with every patient. And you can see pretty much the way they filled it out, who doesn't want to do psychotherapy homework. Like they would skip, how many minutes a day they were going to spend, and they would have ticked off all of these, strong agreement with all of these reasons not to do psychotherapy homework. And so then I would say, Hilda from talking to you, it sounds like, and from reviewing your the way you filled out the memo here, it sounds like the idea of psychotherapy homework doesn't really appeal to you. And then she might say, well, Dr. Burns, yes, I've had 12 previous therapists, and none of them ever asked me to do psychotherapy homework. There's this one homework I would be willing to do, what's that? And she said, well, sometimes I like to call my therapist at 3 a.m. when I'm feeling anxious or lonely. And then you get the idea right away, this is a person who isn't wanting to learn tools, to do tools to change her life. And then what I learned to say, and this was the crux of it, is something like, Hilda, I want you to know that I would love to work with you, and I believe I have the tools to help you change your life. I'd like to be your last therapist and show you how to go from severe depression to joy and self-esteem and productivity. And if we work together, I have no doubt that we can achieve that result. But unfortunately, the tools I use will not work without the homework assignments between sessions. And so if you're looking for just to go and talk to somebody, I'm not the therapist you're looking for, and I couldn't ethically accept you as my patient because I've never once had a patient who refused to do homework who recovered from depression. But you're in luck. There's most of the therapists in our community would be overjoyed to work with you and would not ask you to do psychotherapy homework. And I finish by saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to reject you, and I hope you'll stick with me. But this is, make no doubt about it in your mind, that if you decide to work with me, the homework assignments are not negotiable. It would be absolutely mandatory. And when I first developed that approach and that memo, I was really fearful that I'd lose most of my patients. Yeah. But the opposite happened, and we presented the memo and this type of negotiation with 700 consecutive patients who came to my clinic in Philadelphia for treatment for depression, anxiety, or other problems, and only 7 elected not to stay at the clinic. And that approach worked really well. But therapists, if you ask therapists at a workshop, let's say, or any group, let's say you have a group of 200 therapists, and ask, how many of you have patients who don't do their psychotherapy homework? About 80% of the hands will go up. And then what that tells me, and what I say to the audience, is you're enabling your patients because you're not making them accountable. You're letting them get away with it. Yeah. It's kind of like a mother who says, oh, Johnny, you have to come home at 10 o'clock tonight from the party, but I know you won't, type of thing, kind of giving the subconscious message that they can get away with it. And I find that therapists are afraid to make patients accountable, but that approach has been tremendously effective, and it's the only approach that's been effective. Yeah.
Well, very good. So I think that this will conclude this episode.
We'll pick up in the next podcast on some more of these fantastic questions.
All right. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.